for tat with possible forgiveness. That's probably something that's pretty easy for y'all to remember. In the repeating price-setting game, players will follow a tit-for-tat with possible forgiveness strategy, where they eventually both charge high prices and earn $50 each. Five, four, three, two, one. True. That is right. The correct answer is true.
Can you explain what the tit for tat means?
Tit for tat means, remember when we had the boy and the girl up here, and they were, yeah, you do remember that, don't you? Well, the boy betrayed the girl. The girl gave him one more chance. The boy still betrayed the girl, and then that third time, the girl said, I'm going to charge a low price too. So the girl was trying to cooperate at first, but the boy was uncooperative. So eventually she said, tit for tat, I'm going to do whatever you did to me. You didn't cooperate with me. You charged a low price, now I'm going to charge a low price. If you charge a high price, now I'll charge a high price. It just means you choose high if the person in the last round chose high. You choose low if the person in the last round chose low.
Is that the same example in the video that we watched? And he betrayed her in the beginning, now she betrayed him?
Yeah. Now, if those two people in that video kept playing that game for like 100 rounds or more, they would probably eventually forgive each other and end up cooperating. One more. And these are questions that's actually on homework 3. We were doing questions on homework 3. When ADM, Ajinomoto, and other firms colluded, they all signed a confidential contract stipulating the exact price they would charge for lysine. They were then free to sell however much lysine they could at that price. And this is from the scene from the movie The Informant that we watched.
It's not price. Quantity.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, booyah. False is correct. They were not colluding on price, they agreed on the quantity. Instead of saying, let's all charge a high price at this, they all said, let's all agree on how much we're going to sell. We're going to restrict the amount that we sell. Then they could go out with that limited quantity that they agreed to sell and get as high price as possible. So they were colluding on quantity, not price. Okay, good. I'm going to tell a quick parable. This thing is really easy. It's going to look like I've got all these details, but promise me, what I'm about to do right here is change the whole way you look at the world. Now, I don't want to tell you my objective because it's one of those surprise things at the end. It kind of spoils it. This is a beautiful map of the United States of America. And let's just suppose in the U.S. that we can produce 10 million corn and 0.1 million cars. We have a certain amount of people out there that could work, a certain amount of resources. Some people are raising corn, some people are producing cars. The way things are right now, when everybody's working and working hard, we're making 10 million corn and 0.1 million cars. Then we discover a magic island. This island is magic in that it can turn corn into cars. Meaning you can put corn on a ship, take it to the magic island, and there's a little river that flows through the middle of the island. And when you go down that river through the middle of the island, corn magically changes into cars. And then the ship comes back with a whole bunch of cars. And it turns out that with this magic island, we can say, well, we can produce cars at home, but maybe it's easier for all of us to everybody produce corn and use some of that corn, take it to the Magic Island, and bring back cars. Such that what we do is all the people that were making cars, they're now going into corn production. Instead of 10 million corn, we're now making 20 million corn. So we've doubled corn production. But that means we no longer make any cars. So now we have all this corn, no cars. That's where the Magic Island comes in. Of that 20 million corn, we take 10 million to the Magic Island. And as it goes through that river and comes out the other end, that 10 million corn is turned into 0.2 million cars. So everybody's making corn now. We said, now if everybody's working at corn, we can make 20 million. Let's take half of it, 10 million, take it to the Magic Island. It's turned into 0.2 million cars. We bring the cars back. And now, with this Magic Island, we have 0.2 million cars. Now look at what this did. Before, our consumption was 10 million corn and 0.1 million cars. Now, our consumption is how many corn? 10. We produced 20 million, but we sent 10 to the Magic Island. So now, we have 10 million corn. So we don't have any more corn than we used to. And now we have 0.2 million cars. That Magic Island got us something for nothing. It doubled the amount of cars that we can consume without giving up anything. Same amount of corn, double the amount of cars. Pretty awesome? Raise your hand if you think we should use this Magic Island. Why wouldn't you? Maybe there's some adjustment, people leaving the car factories, going into corn production. That's some unemployment. It's a short-term temporary cost. But this Magic Island is permanent. We can use it forever. It's a permanent increase in our wealth. It's just like technology, isn't it? Technology lets you produce more things, but it causes people to have to change jobs. So a short-term burden and a long-term gain.
But if you have increased unemployment, don't you have like a decrease in being able to consume cars? Even though you have an influx of cars, not as many people can buy cars?
If all those people who left corn production stayed unemployed and for some reason couldn't get into corn production, yeah, you would have a problem. But in every Democratic government we've seen, unemployment tends to be very low. You know, they used to be, what, half or more of the population was farmers? But now, hardly nobody's farmers. Think of all the people in IT now that 20 years ago wasn't even a job. So there is unemployment, but it rarely stays permanent. These last 5 years of the recession have been really odd because unemployment's remained stubbornly high. Now, given these assumptions of what I've said here, raise your hand if you think we should use the Magic Island. I don't see why you wouldn't, given the setup. We do, actually. There is a Magic Island, but it's not so much magic as it is Japan. That's all it is. That's all international trade is. You don't have to think about other people taking our jobs, things like that. We're not competing with Japan. It's just a place where you go, people you can talk to, and you exchange one thing for another. And a lot of us drive Japanese cars now, but they didn't give it to us for free. I would have loved it if they gave us free cars. No, we had to give them something in return. And the international markets are going to make it work out. So we have to give Japan something like corn before we can get cars. And trade doesn't generally occur unless you can get a permanent increase in wealth. Unless the total wealth you can amass with trade is higher. That's why you trade in the first place, to make each other better off. Japan is just a Magic Island and is no different than technology. Technology is just something that lets you do more, do better, but it causes some adjustments. We don't want to still be using the same technology in 1900. We can produce more than we could in 1900 now. But what about the people who made carriages? They were unemployed a while. All the people who used to train horses for carriages. They were out of a job for a while. But I think we're better off for it. That's the parable of the Magic Island. We're going into trade now. And this is one of the most important things of economics. Economics is basically just about trade. About how we can all live a better life, more harmonious, prosperous, and meaningful life if we engage in trade with one another. Not just me and you, but America and China, America and Costa Rica, Oklahoma, and Texas. I want you to get out those sheets of paper I asked you to print off. What we're about to do is one of the more uninteresting and technical parts of this class. There are some things that we're going to do here that just isn't all that very inspiring, isn't all that interesting at first, but it really is necessary to really understand what trade is about, and it teaches you some concepts that you might need in future classes as well. And this is one of those things when... I don't see that. See what? Yeah, I don't know what I was talking about. We're working off what was probably the first sheet that you have. It'll have production possibility for Wu-Tang Clan up there. There's this sheet and the sheet behind it. This is a part of class we're going to go very slow, methodical. I want to make sure you have everything down on paper perfect. Because your homework requires you to do what we're doing here, exactly as we're doing it here, with just some different numbers. The first thing I want to do is make sure we all have the right graphs. You're not going to know why I'm asking you to do this right now. But I want to make sure we all have these same graphs. When you look at the Wu-Tang graph, I want you to draw a square right there at the coordinates of 5 salmon and 6 grain. And I also want you to draw a triangle up at the y-intercept of 10. Again, this is for the Wu-Tang Clan, the one on your left. I want you to draw in the square and triangle that I put here that you don't have on your sheet. Can I turn it? For No-Tang Clan, I want you to do it like this. Where you have a square at 5 salmon and 4 grain. 5 salmon, 4 grain. And then you have a triangle down here at the x-intercept. These two curves are called production possibilities frontiers. It's already written up there for you. I'm going to explain in a minute about what those lines are. But I know for most of you this is going to be so simple it's almost an insult me asking you to do this. But I need you to be able to graph simple lines like this because there'll be about 5 students in here who didn't go to a good high school and they can't do this. You've got to be able to do this. If I give you an equation, you've got to be able to do a simple line like this. Or if I give you this simple line, you've got to be able to tell me what the equation of it is. And up here you can see in the equation I say for No-Tang Clan, what is the formula for that equation? And for no tang, what is the formula? I don't think anybody has much trouble figuring that out. If you do, just come see us. All I did there for like Wu-Tang was note that the y-intercept was 10. So that becomes my 10 up there. The slope of the line is -1. So what you'll have to do on a test is to see a line like this, and then in a multiple choice answer, choose what the right equation is for. Here's what we do with this line. When I was talking about America making corn and cars, I was talking about possibilities. We have a big labor force, and we're smart. We have a lot of resources. We can produce a whole lot of different things. There's a lot of possibilities. We don't have to be producing so much software and mobile devices in the U.S. We don't have to be growing so much corn, but we choose to. There are other things we could be doing. This line represents a possibility for Wu-Tang Clan. I'm using Wu-Tang Clan and No Tang Clan just as two groups. They're metaphors for two people or two countries. We're just going to talk about two countries trading. And we start with simple examples. And what I say is that both Wu-Tang Clan and No Tang Clan, they can produce two things with their time. They can go out and catch salmon, or they can raise grain. And the more grain they make, the less time they have with salmon. The more salmon they catch, the less time they have to make grain. And that's why this equation has a negative slope. I've got a circle right here. That's just me telling you where they are right now. This means that Wu-Tang Clan, they are currently making catching 5 salmon, and they're raising 5 bushels of grain. That's where they are right now. That's their choice. They could be doing something different. They could go from 5 to 6 grain. But if they spend more time raising grain, there's less time to catch fish. So if they go from 5 to 6 grain, they have to go from 5 to 4 salmon. So for every 1 bushel of grain Wu-Tang Clan gets, they have to give up 1 salmon. For every 1 salmon, they have to give up 1 grain. And when they're all working hard doing what they're supposed to, they can produce and consume anywhere on this line. They cannot consume out here. They can't catch 7 salmon and raise 7 grain. There's not enough people, not enough time. This line represents all the possibilities of salmon and grain they can produce and consume. Wu-Tang is not trading yet. They're all alone. This means everything that they consume, they produce. So consumption and production is the same. When we look at No Tang Clan, they also can produce salmon and grain, but they're different people in a different region. They're more limited in their ability to produce grain. At most, they can only produce 5 grain. This means if they only raise grain, they can produce 5 grain, but they won't have any salmon. But they're pretty good at salmon. If they spend all their time catching salmon, they can produce 10 salmon, but they won't have any grain. Right now, I'm telling you they're starting right here, where they're catching 5 salmon and raising 2.5 grain. But they could be anywhere on this line. And do a quick thought experiment with me, and then we'll go to answer some of the questions. Suppose that No Tang is currently producing 5 grain and no salmon. And then they say, well, let's at least get 1 salmon. If they want to go from 0 to 1 salmon, they have to go from here to here, and they give up how much grain? 1/2. for them, for Wu-Tang to get one salmon, they have to give up a whole bird. So it costs them different amounts to produce a good. There's no money here. And when we're talking about cost, we mean if you go out and catch a fish, what's the cost of that? It's the amount of grain you could have produced in that time instead. Let's go ahead and write the answers to these, and then I'll put the graph back up and we'll talk about it. For 2, 3, 4, and 5, the answer is 1, 1 for Wu-Tang. Number 4 is 2. Number 5 is 1/2. 1, 1, 2, 1/2. One, 1, 2, 1/2. What you're going to have to be able to do is look at a PPF curve like that and tell me these opportunity costs. And here's how they work. Number 2 says, for Wu-Tang Clan, the opportunity cost of 1 bushel of grain is, we said it's 1 salmon because you can pick any point here. Suppose we're at the big circle where they're consuming. If they want 1 more grain, that means they want to go from here 5 grain to 6 grain, and they give up how much salmon? 1. So the opportunity cost of 1 grain is 1 salmon. Meaning if they don't take the time to produce 1 more grain, they could have caught 1 salmon during that time. And thus the opposite must also be true. If they want to go from 5 to 6 salmon, they're going to have to go from 5 to 4 grain, and they give up 1 grain. So for Wu-Tang Clan, the opportunity cost of 1 grain is 1 salmon. Opportunity cost of 1 salmon is 1 grain. For any one group, those 2 numbers are always going to be reciprocal to each other. 1 is reciprocal of 1, 2 is reciprocal of 1/2. For No-Tang Clan, number 4, the opportunity cost of 1 bushel of grain. Let's suppose they currently have 0 grain and 10 salmon, and then they say we at least want 1 grain. So we want to go from here to here, from 0 grain to 1 grain. We want to go from here to here. How many salmon do they give up? 2. So for No-Tang, the opportunity cost of 1 grain is 2 salmon. Likewise, as we've already seen, we already did the other one, opportunity cost for them to get 1 more salmon is 1/2 grain. They go from here to here, and we give up 1/2 grain. 2 1/2 reciprocals. Here's why all this matters. I'm going to say it first, and then I'll write it down and then copy it. Right now, these people are not traders. But they can come together and trade and both get something for nothing. They'll really get something for nothing. And the way they do that, when they come together and trade, each group is going to produce the good they have a comparative advantage in. You've probably never heard the word comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is just the good you produce at a lower opportunity cost. So each group is going to go off and produce the good, which they do best. They do best means the lowest opportunity cost. Looking at these numbers up here again. If I just focus on grain, and I see that Wu-Tang Clan, for them to get 1 grain, they give up 1 salmon. For No-Tang to get 1 grain, they give up 2 salmon. So So Wu-Tang gives up less salmon for every grain they make, so they're better at grain. They produce it at a low opportunity cost, and they have a comparative advantage in it. So I'm going to write it down here. Comparative advantage. I'm going to explain it like this. Comparative advantage, you have one in good X, whether it be salmon or grain, if you produce it at the lowest opportunity cost. Comparative advantage, you have one in good X that is produced at less opportunity cost. So who gives up the least salmon to get one grain? Wu-Tang. Who gives up the least grain to get one salmon? No-Tang. And so you want to write there on that sheet of paper somewhere that No-Tang has a comparative advantage in salmon. Wu-Tang has a comparative advantage in grain. I want you just as a little tedious and we know what comparative advantage is. We know how to identify the group that has a comparative advantage in any one good. Now I'm going to write one more on the next sheet of paper. That should look like this. You have tables there. I'm going to write one thing at the top, one sentence at the top. When groups trade, each is going to produce only the good they have a comparative advantage in. I started you off with PPF curves for two people, two groups. We're able to identify how the comparative advantage each one has. We know that when they go to trade, and we're now going to bring them together for trade after this next table, we know what they're going to produce. But first, this table is our starting point. Before trade, how everything is going. And we've got for Wu-Tang, they're producing and consuming 5 grain, 5 salmon. For No-Tang, they're producing and consuming 2.5 grain and 5 salmon. They're not trading yet. This is called autarky, no trade. So imports and exports, they're all 0, even if that looks like a 6, it's 0. And production equals consumption. I've always got to tell you how much they're consuming and producing initially. Like on the homework, I'll tell you how much they're starting off at, just like I'm telling y'all how much they're producing and consuming in the beginning. But now we're going to go to trade. We're going to put them together to trade. Before we know anything about the trade, we already know what each group is going to do. Each group is going to do what they're best at. And what's Wu-Tang going to produce? Grain. That's why over here for Wu-Tang, I had y'all draw a triangle at 10 grain. And now maybe we want to put a legend somewhere. Put something like triangle equals production with trade. We're denoting on here that a triangle, that's telling us how much a group is producing when they engage in trade. On homework 4, you've got to go to the graphs and put a triangle telling me where they're trading at. And I'll tell you to do it. And so Wu-Tang, they're producing all grain, no salmon, just like the U.S. When we trade, we do what we're best at. We let other people do what they're best at, and we trade for what we're not best at. No-Tang has a comparative advantage in salmon, so they're going to spend all their time catching salmon, which is why we drew a triangle at 10 salmon and no grain. Since Wu-Tang is producing only grain, if they want salmon, they got to trade for it. Since No-Tang is catching only salmon, if they want grain, they got to trade for it. And that's what they're going to do. I'm going back to the second sheet now. Now, number 7, it asks you to go with a partner and figure out a trade that will make both people better off. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you a trade. So all I'm doing here is telling you a trade they can make where both going to get something for nothing. And we're going to assume that Wu-Tang, since they're producing grain, they're going to export 4 of their grain, and No-Tang is going to export 5 of their salmon. Notice I marked out which one. So Wu-Tang is going to export 4 grain. No-Tang is going to export 5 salmon. And each group imports what the other is exporting. So they're trading 4 grain for 5 salmon. What you, in the homework, I'm going to tell you the trade and you're going to do it. On a multiple choice question on the homework, I'm going to tell you a trade and you're going to tell me if it makes both of them better off or not. And what we're going to do is see here now that this trade does. Now we're going to go back to that table of production and consumption and put in what's happening now. We saw that Wu-Tang was producing 10 grain, but they're exporting 4 grain, and so they're left with 6 grain. Wu-Tang gets all their salmon from imports, they have 5. No-Tang gets all their grain from imports, so they have 4. No-Tang produces 10 salmon. They're exporting 5 salmon, so they're left with 5. You've got those 2 sheets, well, if they're stapled, you can't do this, you can kind of look at them side by side. You remember those squares I made you plot? Those are these points, right? For Wu-Tang, 6 grain, 5 salmon. For No-Tang, 4 grain, 5 salmon. So in those squares, we were just plotting these points. And if you look at that, you'll see something. After this trade, neither one of them get any more salmon. They're still consuming the same amount of salmon as they did before. But without giving up any salmon, both get more grain. Wu-Tang is consuming 1 more grain than before trade. No-Tang is consuming 1.5 more. Meaning when I look at this, I'm comparing these 2 tables. Wu-Tang was at 5 grain, now they're at 6 grain. 1 more grain, same salmon, something for nothing. No-Tang was at 2.5 grain, now they're at 4. They got 1.5 grain. They gave up no salmon, something for nothing. I'm just going to refer back to this sheet, say the lesson of all this. The lesson, and that's everything on the sheet that you need to do for homework. The lesson of this is that this is like a magic item. I mean, they literally got something for nothing. They consume more grain without giving up any salmon, and that's what trade is. A society is able to consume more wealth without giving up anything. And often they get more of both goods. This is gains from trade. This is what trade is all about. That's why people working together can consume greater wealth. Stop real quick. I want to just show you the homework you're going to do so you see how closely related it is to it. When you go to do homework 4, this is my answer to it. One difference is that instead of having 2 different graphs, you've got to put everything on the same graph. And I used 2 different colors so it was very clear what is what. As long as you tell me what is what, you can have different labels for this. It will be okay, but the rest of the first 2 sheets is the same. One final thing. People, what is economics about?
A pleasant life for everyone.
How does an honest person become wealthy?
By enhancing the lives of others.